Welcome everyone to another episode. What we're going to do, we're joined by Dr. Flojuane Cofer. She's a trained epidemiologist. She's also an untrained truth teller, maybe trained by life. And she is in charge. She's the chair of the Measure U committee, which is an initiative that was passed by the people of Sacramento in order to prioritize new spending and new budgets. Recently, it's come under controversy because the way that the Measure U funding has been spent or prioritized is counter to what was promised, and also in light of the kind of racial reawakening and kind of anti-police protests that have taken place in this city and many other cities, it doesn't reflect what the people say they want. And she and Dr. Flo, as she's commonly known, has been an outspoken critic of the current administration in Sacramento, led by Mayor Darrell Steinberg, who has been, I'm not going to put words in her mouth. I'm going to put words in my own mouth. And I'm like, he ain't shit. Because the way that he's approached this has been very disappointing. Many of us have supported him. Sacramento, for those of you who don't know, is like one of the most diverse cities in the nation. And so it has the raw material to be an exemplary metropolis. Like, this is, if we did things right, it would give a lot of lessons to so many cities around the nation, around the world even. And the fact that at every juncture where we could step up, we have faltered, we have fucked up, and we have also denigrated the people who are hurting, the people who have been deprived of resources. We have actually been exemplary in terms of like, here's what's not to do. Here's how you don't respect people who actually have been undermined and have been oppressed by what's going on in our city. And like the priorities that we reflect in our budgets support that. And so, Dr. Flo has been very, very, she's in a difficult position of kind of being part of like the administration in terms of like respect and in terms of authority, but also being denigrated by that same authority. So anyways, I hope that that's, now that we're recording, I hope this is a more suitable introduction to, the formidable person in our midst. So please introduce yourself and kind of like introduce kind of what Measure U is and kind of the context that we find ourselves in.
Sure. So I am the Senior Director of Policy at Public Health Advocates and also the chair of the Measure U Community Advisory Committee. And our committee was formed last year when the second Measure U sales tax was passed. So the history of Measure U is that there was a sales and use tax that was passed in 2012 by voters and it was a temporary half-cent tax that was set to expire in 2019. And the whole intent of it really was to restore police and fire services and park maintenance and other what they deemed essential city services that had to be cut during the recession in 2008. And so as it was set to expire, the mayor and council decided to put a permanent 1 cent sales tax on the ballot in November 2018. And so that would be doubling the amount of revenue that would come in, about $100 million a year. And they promised
Which is substantial.
Our general fund budget usually ranges somewhere between $400 and $500 million. So that would basically be like, bringing in an additional 10% of revenue. And so they, at the time, the way that they campaigned was, we've restored those services, and so everything we did with the first half cent is going to stay where it was. But the second half cent is going to be used for
which is permanent
economic development, right? And this is permanent, and that was going to go to inclusive economic development, and that they were also going to make sure that they spent some money on affordable housing and homelessness. And part of that plan was to do a bond, except. And
I want to make clear, like this, the mayor was a huge proponent of this plan.
Yes.
He said
He ran around town campaigning primarily for this because there were some other advocates, and I know I was in that group that were looking at a sugary drink tax for Sacramento, which could have brought in a pretty hefty amount of money. And they decided not to go in that direction because Measure U was going on the ballot, and they were explicitly saying that the second half cent was going to be used for these purposes. Now, we were all worried because this is a general fund tax.
There were skeptics of this plan because people were like, there's not any kind of, we can't control how this money is spent. It's up to them to do. We have to trust them.
Right,
to
because
say,
and that's a
what they said
voter
they were gonna
thing.
do.
That's a voter thing. So if you want the money to be given
Have
to a
strings
specific
attached.
purpose, then you have to have a 2/3 majority, and that's really hard to get 2/3 of the people who vote to say yes. If you just wanted to go into your general fund and allow your city council and mayor to decide where it goes, you only have to have a 50% majority. And so this new half-cent tax passed at 57%. So the question is always there.
We didn't have the super majority that we would have needed.
Well,
to have
that's the question. That's the question, because so many people, I think, who voted no might have voted yes if it was going to a specific purpose and they could be.
Because some people voted no because it didn't have any kind of strings attached.
Correct. And so we always have to remember that.
And they've been borne out.
Yep. Yeah, they were right. And even so, the Sacramento Sister Circle puts together a voter guide. And I distinctly remember this one because we said something to the effect of like, remember when, Hillary Clinton was our presidential, candidate, and we held our breath and said, girl, I guess I'm with her. The same thing is true here.
I want that shirt. Girl, I guess
I'm with her.
That's a Joe Biden shirt. It's like,
right? Yeah, like
I hope so, nigga.
I don't know. I guess this is what we doing. Like it needs to be a question mark. This is what we're doing.
Trump.
Yeah, I mean that's where it was like we laid out the case so that people could feel justified in whichever position they came to, because we really were honestly like, look, if we lose the first half cent, the police and fire have contracts and they're going to get their money. So then we're going to be closing down pools and parks. We're not going to be able to have free transportation for kids under 21. Like,
we're going to have tanks and grenades, but we're not going to have pools.
We're not going to have pools. We're not going to have the stuff that we know our communities need. The flip side of that, though, is that the police always get their money and there's no protection to say they won't. And so, remember, the campaign promise was half of the money goes to inclusive economic development. Trey, how much of this money do you think has actually gone to inclusive economic development?
Let me put my optimistic hat on. I would say 20%.
You would be absolutely wrong. The very first year, it was 7%, and this year it's 5%. But the police got 41% of the money last year and are now getting 51% of the money.
And I want to emphasize how offensive and kind of like almost like it's not just kind of offensive as a Black person, because you're like, you should be prioritizing people that you've always delegitimized and oppressed, but it's also kind of like not strategically smart. It's like we could actually be a city that is trying to innovate. Like, imagine what we could do with like 5% of $100 million a year just to try new shit, just to say, hey, what is it like to support a community initiative around kind of policing? Or what is it like to give people who are poor and Black money straight up?
Earth basic income.
See what happens.
Totally
agree. See what happens. It's not even about we need to prove what's going to happen before we allocate these funds. It's like this money was for trying out inclusive economic development. It shouldn't have an outcome that it needs to be attached to. It's just about, hey, we're going to give communities that are deprived money.
Right.
Imagine that.
And especially because we have the money. So the thing that's frustrating to me is
we voted for the money.
So housing and homelessness have gotten $0 because the plan the city council had was that they were going to bond against this. And I have challenges with bonds because it basically is debt that we're incurring, and then we have to pay this debt service for forever. And so I get sometimes that's necessary. I mean, people have mortgages on their homes. There are things that you have to go into debt for, right? But a city needs to be really careful what they choose to go into debt for and what they don't, because you're basically saddling the next generation, right? For, 20, 30 years.
Welcome to America.
With that debt. And so now that the city's credit rating has gone down because of COVID-19 and the impact it's had on the budget, that bond is gone. So there will be no money going to housing and affordable housing and homelessness.
Because it's servicing that debt. Well, also the thing about kind of debt service is that it also takes priority above kind of discretionary priorities, right?
Yep.
It's we can't even do what we want because we actually have to do this.
Exactly.
And that's also kind of the plan.
Right, exactly. And so it's outrageous. And the only answer to this is that it was a bait and switch, right? Because just last year, Mayor Steinberg said, and I will quote him, he said, people would not have voted for Measure U if they thought it was only going to pay for pensions and salaries. This is now a matter of trust with the voters. None of what I described was unknown or contradicted before the election. We knew the pension obligations, and we made it clear that Measure U was not intended to be a solution to that problem.
Thank you for quoting him directly, because he needs to be held so accountable that you run for mayor. I know we cut that out because we weren't recording earlier, but I'm going to say here now, Dr. Flo for mayor. That's all I'll say.
I take that in the spirit at which given, but I want to make it clear to anyone listening that the only campaign I am running right now is to get this Measure U money back, and I do not have any intentions of running for
Spoken like a true candidate for mayor. I was like, and I want to make clear that I'm going to do everything in my power to make her run for me.
Oh, Trey.
And you know that I don't give up.
I do know that. That's part of the reason why I'm laughing and terrified. I think the last thing you want is a strong advocate with their heart set on doing something that you don't want to do.
I'm like, she don't know she wants it yet.
You'll be like, wait, what's happening? Where am I going? Hold on. Who left? What? Why?
I was like, there's gonna be
I get my ballot and I'm like, why is my name on this ballot? When did I don't remember filing.
How'd I win?
What just happened here? What I think though, Trey, about this, it's most egregious is that the police don't even need this money. So, it's interesting to me because the mayor said when he attended our last Measure U committee meeting about a week ago, or now almost 2 weeks ago, he said, this is not the police committee. Like, this is not, and I'm like, then don't give all our money to it, because we're the Measure U oversight committee. So wherever you spend our money, that's now what we have oversight on. So now I have to pour through, what did the police spend this money on? Was it useful? Was it effective? What was their overtime? Like, all this is our responsibility. Yeah, I have to dive into that.
The fact that that's on you, right? You're like, I see the outcomes of policing.
I do.
I should not have to go through it with a fine-tooth comb to prove to you that there's more effective ways to use this money.
Right.
And even further, I'm like, we know based on like this awakening that's happening that like we have over prioritized policing versus actually helping communities. That's not a case I need to make. And the fact that like I saw, and I got very upset when I saw you say your piece at the Measure U, which by the way, we had to fucking drag kicking and screaming the mayor to even attend.
We had to drag kicking and screaming to even have the meeting because they had been canceling our meeting for months.
You had to say, I'm having this meeting no matter what.
No matter what. And then they're like, oh, no, we'll have the meeting and we'll even have the mayor attend. Really? So all that. And then when he got there and he heard your arguments, which were not unreasonable by any stretch of the word. It was like, this is what you said you wanted to do with this money. The money is here. On top of all that, here's what has transpired in the interim, which makes it even more necessary to investigate other ways to use this money, certainly not for the police. And he's like, I hear you, but don't give a fuck. Yeah.
And I'm like, that's ridiculous.
Your job's not the same as mine, and 80% of the voters voted for me, so sit down, little girl.
No one ran against you, nigga. Like, honestly, like, no one even ran against. It's like, I can't. I was like, no one ran against you because Sacramento is so provincial that, like, it's hard to go against established power. Even someone is like, and I will say, Darrell Steinberg is probably going to go down in history as one of the most effective state senator presidents, pro tems of our state, given what California likes to prioritize. Mm-hmm. He's very effective. Willie Brown, not as tight as that, but an effective operator, for sure. And the fact that he's not using his established credibility for equity and for people that need it, I am appalled.
Yeah.
And there's no other cave. There's no other way to feel about someone like Darrell Steinberg. If you're watching this, you ain't shit. I'll say that. And I love Kelly.
Yeah. Hi, Kelly. Here's the thing. I am disappointed because, and this is what I said on the record to him, don't stand up and tell me that you care about kids when you funded the opposition to the measure to save 2.5% of our budget for kids. Like, you funded it. It was the fire union was number one in funding at like $41,000. The police union came in at another $30,000. And the third person on that list of highest contributions to fund against protecting 2.5% of the money for kids, okay, was Daryl Steinberg at $15,000. This was 2.5% of the budget would have been somewhere around $12 million a year for 12 years. Just to make sure that if we had an economic downturn, we had some money set aside.
We had some cover. We had some cover for these kids.
It was not a new tax. It would have made it so that he wouldn't have had to come to us wringing his hand saying, well, the police took all the money. We'd know at least 2.5% was protected for the kids. And sure enough.
Which sounds pitiful, by the way.
It sounds pitiful, especially when, the measure you increased that the police got last year was $10 million. Just off top.
Probably for their overtime.
Didn't even say anything, right? Like, they didn't even bother. They didn't have to. It was just like, by the way, here's some good money. And then the mayor turns around and instead of apologizing for that, because it's campaign promise broken number one, he turns around and says, well, I mean, the majority of the second half cent is going to go to that, except it doesn't. There was only $6.2 million
and
out of
this is why we should have
$100 million.
insisted upon strings. Because the people who are skeptical, they're like, we don't trust these people.
Right.
They were right.
They were right.
We were like, we work with them. You know what? Let me bring this. Let me pull these receipts. So remember when Stephon Clark was shot, and I was talking mad shit, and you were probably talking like a much more measured shit. And Daryl Steinberg.
It was just you were my anger translator, and hopefully I'm somebody else's anger translator.
I'm about to leave. So it was me, you, and Alika Brown, and I was like, and Mayor Steinberg said, "Come meet with me. I want to understand Black needs and wants, and I understand that you guys are in pain, and I want you to think I have credibility." And we held our noses, and we went
Ramel.
And Ramel. And Ramel, but I'm like, that happened. And he was like, tell me what you feel. And we were like, I don't feel as if your response to Stephon Clark's shooting, I don't feel your empathy with Black people is sufficient or authentic. And if you really want our support, and and he, to his credit, called the worst niggas in the city to tell him about his life.
Yeah.
You, me, Ramel, Alika, that's hard.
We're not people who are known for biting our tongue.
We're not.
or sugarcoating anything. We're like, here's the medicine. Eat it.
Eat it. Also, I actually am an epidemiologist. And I can actually form medicine. So it's like, I want to believe that in that moment he was authentic in saying, hey, I know that I don't know how to deal with this, and I'm actually relying upon you to tell me how to move forward. And after all the shit I said, I was like, look, if you're serious about this shit, please do something. And here's what you can do. And you have a stable of niggas who are like, here's how you do this shit, and here's how you mean it. And here's what the outcomes would be if you meant it. And so to see this display, this pitiful display of like, and actually it's not even like he cares. Like the impression I get from Daryl Steinberg when I see him speak is someone who he's not talking to us. He's talking to someone else. He's talking to the 80% in his mind that voted for him, that live in Orangevale, or that don't care about Dr. Flo or Trey. And they're just like, well, this is who or police, or he's talking directly to
He's
police.
gotten $53,000 in campaign contributions from the police union. So he's talking to the people who donate to his campaigns, and he's making them feel good because law and order is going to be restored, but he said some nice liberal talking points so everybody can feel like they're not the Ku Klux Klan. That's really what it is. It's like making people who are doing damaging things feel like they're the good people.
And they're not. And the thing is, and what's so, if I were Daryl Steinberg, I'd be like, homie, this, you won. Yeah, you won. But you're never going to win again with this type of shit.
And he
You know,
wants
and
Morris Matsui's job, right? Like
girl, I will run for Congress before I let that shit happen. I swear to God. On God. I'm not even trying to run to win. I'm running to him lose.
to spoil. Yes.
Katie Valenzuela already beat me to Steve C because I didn't want that nigga to win at all.
Yeah, I go Katie. I couldn't be happier with the outcome, honestly.
Please. Oh my God. They're like, you're so petty. I'm like, not petty enough to run though. She got it.
Yeah.
So I just think that so in terms of what can be done, because so I want you to kind of characterize the controversy around you speaking out, because I do not think you've made a lot of people happy, except people who are acknowledging how fucked up this all is.
Yeah, so I will be really honest. I think there were probably some people who in Sacramento who were like, see, this is why we should have never let them learn how to read. Because I said that all the time. Like, see, this is why it used to be illegal for y'all folks to learn how to read. Because I do think that I recognize, you're a rare breed, but I do think there's a way that Californians engage with one another that is more polite than the East Coast. And as an East Coaster, I don't do nice is something that's reserved for babies and children and people who are dying. Like
librarians.
When you're in a position of authority and I'm coming to tell you what the problems are, I'm going to make a well-reasoned argument. I'm going to have done my research and I'm going to present you with numbers and, with an argument that says this is what you need to do. And so that's what I laid out for him. I think it's interesting that it was, take down, fine. I'll take that. But I think people are like, it was angry. And I'm like, well, first of all, anger is a normal human emotion. And if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. Secondly,
also,
I didn't call him out of his name.
About how to discredit Black women.
Of course. Absolutely. Yeah. Because, and I am actually of the belief that when we say it's not professional to show certain emotions, we are engaging in system justifying tendencies. We're basically saying that if you don't like the way things are right now, you're not a professional and you lose credibility. And that is the exact opposite of what we should want if we're actually trying to create
when
change.
The profession doesn't have credibility.
Exactly. So I laid out for him arguments about
nuts, and I feel like I should be as credible as
absolutely. I wear my hair in locks. I feel the same way. I think that part of what the people who are upset about it are upset about is that you're not supposed to talk to people in authority like that. You're not supposed to tell them they're wrong. You're not supposed to tell them that their ideas are uninspired. You're not supposed to tell them that it doesn't make sense. You're not supposed to call out the things that they've said and how they contradict with the things that they've done. You're not supposed to do that. And you're certainly not supposed to do that to someone who is supposedly a Democrat, someone who's supposedly on your side, right? I think there's this feeling of like it's friendly fire. And it's like, we have Trump to fight against. And I keep trying to remind folks that Trump is not in Sacramento. Okay, we have a supermajority in the assembly. We have a supermajority in the state senate, and we have a totality of city council. All 9 of them are registered Democrats. So this is not a friendly fire thing. This is does your word lined up with your deeds? And I'm not in a gang. I'm not blood in, blood out on any of this stuff. So if you're not right, I'm coming for you. I don't care if you share a hair care.
But also, it actually means more because first of all, they let a wolf into the chicken coop. It's like and this is the reason I brought up what the mayor did with us personally is that despite our outspokenness, he thought that we were the right Black people, that if he could convince us that he was, well-intentioned, that we'd tone it down and that we would provide cover for his terrible and uninspired and I would say racist decision-making.
Absolutely.
And and after he did that, he appointed you to this position, which means that he was like, she's a doctor, she's an epidemiologist, she cares about her reputation, she cares about outcomes, she cares about access, he probably said in his mind.
Oh yeah, I had the behind closed doors meeting where I was told that I'm part of the city's leadership team. And I said, no, I'm not. I am over your oversight committee. That means my job is to look with a critical eye on everything you do and to then give you advice on how you can do it better. I'm not part of the city's leadership team. Let's make that very clear here.
You're like,
and then Howard Chan asked me
to make sure you guys don't do what you're doing.
And then Howard Chan asked me, the question I think we all want to know is, do you trust us?
No, bitch.
What have you
If it
done?
was up to me, Howard Chan would be living in fucking Gaul.
Howard Chan is our city manager, and it's a name for those of you listening who may not be familiar, because we do talk a lot about the mayor and city council, but he is appointed to his position. He technically works for them, although they often act like they work for him. And he has a lot of power and does not have to be subject to the sunshine laws around the Brown Act. So he can start committees that don't have to, that can have meetings that aren't televised, and that can have agendas that are posted at the last minute. Like, he's not required to do any
So
of the
as
things
you run
that
for
are there.
mayor, we're also going to concurrently run a strong mayor campaign. Mayor Johnson was not a great person to kind of be the face of strong mayor because, he tries to finger children. But, that's
that is as succinctly as you can say it.
Strongness.
Yeah.
But I think that, like, what's actually the problem is that not only do we not have, leadership that has any backbone or kind of moral or values driven agenda, we also, even if you were mayor, you don't have the power to be like, Howard, kick rocks. We need someone actually about that life in this job.
The mayor is basically the chair of the meetings and a city council member that's elected by the entire city, right? Like that, it's just a ninth vote. It's not, there's no special power. It's not like
I
governor,
want someone
right?
in charge. Because that's how we hold them accountable.
And we can't hold Howard Chan accountable because he's not elected.
Not in charge of anything.
Right. And we can't hold Howard Chan accountable because he's not elected. And so, but he runs a lot of the budget, and I, a lot of, I think, where.
What are your feelings about, like, don't say anything you don't feel comfortable saying, but what do you think his priorities are? Like, why, given that he might have even the majority of the say-so and kind of how budgets are prioritized, like, why is he doing what he's doing?
So, I'm not, I always hesitate to, like, share people's personal business, but I think he has his own traumas, and I think that they play out in city politics. I think he has an affinity for the police because of the role that they played in his own personal traumas. And so I think he likes to fund them. I think he is uncomfortable generally with conversations around advanced peace or the program that preceded it, ceasefire, that went away in 2014. I think he very much believes in the good guys and bad guys philosophy of this, and he wants the bad guys to be locked up and go away, and he believes that the police are part of the good guys, and that there are maybe a few bad apples that might need to be contended with, but generally speaking, there's a lot of thugs out in these streets engaging in mayhem and making our cities unsafe, and we need the boys in blue to do it right. I mean, that's where it comes from. And I want to express empathy to anyone who is a victim of violence, because I get that when you and your family have been victimized, that it violates your sense of safety and your sense of trauma, but it doesn't, like, take away your responsibility to still have to think through critically and think through with data. And I would be honest if I would be dishonest if I didn't say I think some of that is also wrapped up in racism. I think it's wrapped up in an uncritical lens. Like, I don't think Howard Chan doesn't strike me as somebody who's particularly well read beyond budgets and accounting in terms of social theory, in terms of what works. Like, I don't think he's read, I would go on a limb and say, I don't think he's ever read a book about what we could do other than policing to make ourselves safe. I think when he hears the words public safety, he thinks police and fire, and he doesn't think housing and schools and community investment. And he fucks his own
people up. I mean, Hmong people, I don't know, he's not Hmong, but he's Asian. They're some of the poorest people in this region. It's like, you at your detriment say police and fire is okay, and, like, they'll just save the day. It's like every single person in Sacramento who is resource deprived loses under this infrastructure, under this priority system. There's no way for anyone to, besides maybe kind of like established, well-resourced white people, to say, this is working. Yep. Howard Chan can't go back to his own community and say it's working.
Yep.
Even if you just judge him based on what he says about Asian people.
Yep.
There's no way.
Yeah. I definitely think that, and and I'm not saying this because he's Asian American, I'm saying this because I think that this is sort of a category that Americans fall into in general, is there are people who still believe in the American dream and people who don't. And I think the people who still believe in the American dream are people who see this, who think that the system as it works or as it is can work, and there may be some ways to tweak it, but that ultimately they want to justify the existing system because it's good and it offers opportunity and all of those, and
they see themselves in it.
Right. And then I think there are the people who are like, this American dream has not come true. It's been a nightmare for many of us. And it's not designed for this. And these are all talking points. This is all dogma. It's not real. Right. And I think people fall into I hate to dichotomize in that way because there's certainly gray areas, but I think people are either like, this is working, let's make it better, or let's try something different. And then I think the level of pragmatism you go about that, right? Like I don't live in a world where there are unicorns that, fart rainbows. So I get that I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and have, everything completely devolved. And so I do try to operate within this structure, but I also try to be very clear that when I'm operating, I am an abolitionist at heart. I think that we need a constitutional convention for the whole country so we can go back and rethink even the structures that we have in place because they weren't put in place to
burn that shit.
By most of us. I think we need to rethink what we consider as public safety. I would be totally fine with disbanding the police and fire departments and rethinking what they do in terms of fire. I think has far too many full-time employees that are doing far too much medical stuff, and that could be, reallocated elsewhere. And then we don't have enough part-time fire people when we have fires that we need to fight, and so then we rely on prison labor. And so I think that's a problem that needs some design thinking around it, right? We have too many people sitting around the firehouse.
Or just moral thinking.
Yeah, like too many people sitting around doing non-fire related jobs and costing us a fortune when most of the time, and then when we have a fire, we don't have enough people. That feels like a problem we can figure out, right? Policing, again, I think we invest too much, like they get 45% of the entire city budget. And even if we gave them $0,
and they solve like 2 crimes a year.
Correct. They get 45%, which is almost $180 million a year. And even if we took the entire allocation they get from Measure U away from them, they still would get the biggest chunk of our city budget. Like they get almost $180 million, that even if we took all $45.7 million away from them from Measure U, they still would get the largest chunk of the city budget. Like fire gets 117 million.
And what do they have to show for it? This is the law enforcement.
That's what I'm saying.
That is like, I mean, they
saw the New York Times
two fucking felony crimes a year.
Yeah.
What are you doing mostly? Just harassing niggas?
Harassing homeless people. And again, the only tools they really have are violence, right? You can arrest, you can threaten, you can harm, or you can shoot. And so they show up, and I think the thing that we often don't talk about as well is how many situations escalate because the police show up that would have died out on their own or would have been perfectly peaceful without them. And what do alternatives look like, right? Because
look what happened in Atlanta. It's
exactly.
Like, can you imagine an 80-year-old lady falling asleep in a drive-thru and end up fucking shot? No way.
Not. Of course not.
Of course not. That'd be ludicrous.
Or if we had just an emergency mental health, like we have here with MH First, that's sponsored by Anti-Police Terror Project, where they, you can call them if there's a mental health crisis, and they don't show up with weapons. They show up with food and water and medical supplies, and they're like, "Can we help you?"
And intention to solve a problem, not to make a problem.
Right. They are successful in what they do because they don't show up escalate. Nobody is like, oh, shoot, MH First is here. I got to run. I got warrants. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't escalate a situation. You're not now worried about your safety. You're not worried about there being criminal justice consequences to them being here. And that's part of what I think the police will not even engage in a conversation about is how many of the incidents that occur happen because you were there and you were not in a prevention mode. You were actually the lighter fluid on.
You're trying to justify your being there.
Right.
And the only way to justify
and you made it worse.
Right.
To the tune of, so the part of the reason why I've made the argument that the police don't need this money is because they already get 45% of the budget. And even if we took away all the Measure U money, they still would have the biggest chunk of the budget. And because they cost taxpayers at least $8.2 million in less than a year with all these settlements we had to pay out. $5.2 million to John Hernandez, 2.4 to Stephon Clark, and then $550,000 to for hurting the protesters in East Sacramento. And I bring that one up because that's another example of something that would have been totally peaceful had they not shown up and they were the aggressors, and then it cost the city $500,000.
Honestly, I'm an advocate for a policy that says, you know what, show up, fuck up, but that money, that settlement money comes directly from your budget.
Because now we're paying,
why is that not even already happening?
What is your premium when you've had to pay out $8.2 million in settlements? Because I can tell you the insurance company is going to be charging a lot of money.
Oh my God, Moody's is letting your ass up.
Exactly.
You know, they're like, I don't want to insure that.
$7 million in overtime costs. And then the thing that I think makes this all worse is that we have lost $90 million in Sacramento due to COVID-19. And these folks are still contracted to get their 3.5% annual raise. They just got one on December 19th of 2019, and they're getting another one on December 19th of 2020, while our state workers, who make up most of the tax base in Sacramento, are going through a 9.23% pay reduction along with 2 days a month in furloughs. Make that make sense for me.
Well, it can't. And there's no way to make it make sense. And I think the only way to deal with this is to confront it and be like, here is our situation. Just as clearly as you've laid out, here's what is actually happening. Does that make sense to you, voter? Does that make sense to you, person in Sacramento who actually does not want to live in a tax funder police state? It's to conclude this episode, which I think, we have laid the foundation for what's fucked up. If I'm a person in Sacramento or in any city that someone is looking at this at, what is to be done? What could they do to affect Measure U funding, and what could they do in their own city to kind of make their voice heard about reprioritizing city funds?
So if you're in Sacramento, July 1st, the city council is having a special meeting on public safety. The mayor has come up with his reform agenda, but we really need to be pushing back and saying, you need to take this money back and you need to give it to communities. And I'm really lifting this up because some of the parents, for folks in Sacramento, you may be aware that there's been a lot of recent gun violence. And there are people who don't always connect these two issues. And so I want to be very clear in connecting them. The mothers who have lost children to gun violence had an event last Saturday. And what was so striking to me is these are the people who have the right to be angry about anything they want to. And you know what most of them said? There's not enough money in our communities, and that's why this is happening. And you know why there's not enough money in our communities? Because we spend 73% of our budget on police and fire, with police getting 45%, and we have not invested in these communities. And so when we sit here during an economic downturn, which is closed schools, which, or a pandemic, which is closed schools, caused an economic downturn, closed our businesses, separated people from the things that they do to be able to make themselves feel better and connect, it's not surprising that gun violence has gone up.
And it's only going to increase.
And we're all financially stressed, we're all personally stressed, and we're all socially stressed, and our mental health is deteriorating. People are calling the suicide hotline at record numbers. Domestic violence has gone up. These are all things we know because they follow patterns, that when there's financial stress and personal stress and social stress, violence will occur. And so we know the answer to that, right? And the answer to that is to alleviate some of that stress. That doesn't come by giving the police a raise this year. That comes by making sure that we're investing in those communities and making sure that they have what they need, including housing protections, including jobs, we're in a place right now where that should be our highest priority and need, not
low-hanging fruit as well.
And that was the promise. So if you're in Sacramento, I encourage you, there is a slide deck that will allow you to walk through. It's about 15 slides that will allow you to walk through everything we talked about here, so you don't have to be an expert on it. You can share it on social media. It's tinyurl.com/giveitbacksac. tinyurl.com/giveitbacksac. And so if you go there, you can see the presentation. Share it with if you're a union member, share it with your union. Share it with your faith community. Share it with your community organizations. Share it. Take it on your tablet and show it to grandma and walk her through it. Tell her to tell her whole bridge club because they've probably figured out how to play bridge on Zoom now. We all know. Tell her to tell all her friends, right? Like we need people to reach out and to call. We need to spread the word, and we need to reach out and call and let them know that we're in a state of emergency and our communities deserve investment. We need to remind them that the police should not get raises or any budget increase when we can't afford the money that we promised to the communities. And then to tell them to spend the money how they promised, on inclusive economic development, on housing, and on homelessness. Those are the pressing needs. And I actually think we have a moment now if we can all come together on this. This is not specifically a fight about defunding the police, although that is one of the things that are happening. This is about honoring our campaign promises and making sure that we actually invest in public safety. If you want to be safe, these are the things you do. If you want to have somebody respond to an emergency, then keep funding the police. But I want to be very clear that for me in my house, justice for me is not solving my murder. Justice for me is me never being murdered in the first place. And that happens when we invest in prevention. And police are not prevention. They are violence workers. I want somebody to invest in the thing that's not violence.
So all you've told me is a mayoral campaign platform.
These people
so
lose
I'm
their
really
mind.
glad that I could facilitate the launch of that. So do what Flo said. Honestly, I think that, it was worth having this conversation to give some tangible tools to people who live in this city still. I am so disappointed by the leadership that we've selected in the city, but I'm very heartened by the people who yet live here who are demanding for things to be different. And you are case one of someone who I think is actually in a position to speak on some shit, who knows what they're talking about, and who will not settle for less, and I think that is what, and I think that Sacramento has settled for less for a long motherfucking time. We have said, you know what, whatever. That is not okay anymore. And we thankfully have cultivated and actually kind of given people access who actually do not demand, or who do not settle for less, and who demand real change. And if you don't do it and you ain't about that life, they will tell you to your face at a council meeting, you ain't about that life. And I think that is something that they are very frightened of, because there's a whole culture of mediocrity that says, I won't call you out so long as you don't call me out, because the whole house of cards falls down if we start actually needing competence. And I am so sick of that shit.
Yep.
As are many people who have suffered and who've been murdered because people just refuse to get people in charge who care.
Yep.
So Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
I hope that this ends up mattering, but I'm just like, just to get all your thoughts in one place and put it out in the world, I think will mean a lot. And I think that everything you've said is so vital, and also so kind of like sensible. It's not like you've said anything crazy. You're just kind of like, aren't we supposed to be doing what we said we wanted to do? And shouldn't we do what we say we wanted to do because that's better than what we've been doing? Those aren't outlandish claims, you know? Yep. So I think that it was really important to spotlight your kind of certainty about the situation. And hopefully it matters, because honestly, like if it continues to go the way it's going, they have much more to worry about than budget adjustments.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we about to adjust this goddamn building.
Yeah, because I mean, we're probably going to have to do another shelter in place if the COVID numbers keep going as they are. And people are like, the stress of that is going to cause there to be more, protests. And they're going to be like, it's going to continue to escalate. And unless folks really do something to address what people are protesting.
You know, and if it comes to that, it's like, okay, well, let's fight then. Because apparently y'all don't listen to reason. You don't listen to the writing on the wall, which says shit gotta change because most of us are suffering.
Yep.
So, All right. Well, love you, sweetheart. This has been fantastic.
Thank you so much.
What's your Twitter and Instagram?
Both of them are my first name, which is Flojaune. So you can find me on Twitter, you can find me on Instagram, you can find me on Facebook. I love hanging out on all of them. So feel free to DM me or to tweet, retweet. I love it. Comment. This is a great conversation. I love hearing what people have to say and your perspectives. And so I will bring up things you tell me with or with attribution, depending on what you tell me, because I think it's important to raise up these voices. Like, I'm trying to raise up the voices of these mothers who have lost, parents who have lost children to gun violence, and say, like, that's what they're saying they need. Like, they're out here saying, like, I understand root causes, right? And at the root of this is, I don't want anybody else to experience what I've experienced, and here's how we can do that. So listen to them.
And respect them and change based on their advice, because they've paid the ultimate price.
Absolutely.
Daryl, you've not paid no price.
No prices.
And yet
no prices
you insist on denigrating their experiences by not following what they say to do.
Exactly.
So, all right, well, take care. This has been fantastic. Thank you for listening. And this is why I'm doing this, because lifting up voices like yours that are not only just well-informed and brilliant, but also, like, moral. And I think that, like, we can't lose sight of the fact that, like, this is actually, like, on top of procedure and on top of budget, this is about a moral question of who we want to be and whose priorities we want to kind of, like, focus on, and are we willing to be this shitty?
Yeah.
And I would say nah.
I would hope not. Honestly, I really hope that I wasn't trying to be a jerk, although I'm sure it sounds like it, when I said, like, I really want you to go home and think about this, because I honestly think that some of the things that are our lived experience, other people just are never even considering. And I'd like for you to read something. I'd like for you to think about something, like, really consider, is this how you want to be?
And hopefully it's not.
Because I think a lot of these decisions are intentional, but I just hold on to that hope that maybe this is ignorance versus hubris.
But they're intentional for a few people, but they're habit for the rest. And, like, when you reconsider your habits, you're like, I got fat. What happened? Investigate.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Flo. This has been fantastic.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this. This has been
anytime. Awesome. And also, let's all figure out what's going down in 2023 when the campaign for Flo for mayor will be beginning, and I will have everything to do with that if I need to. And I get what I want. Because it also needs to happen. I'm terrified. If it's not you, then you better make a compelling case for someone else.
Okay.
So that's on you. If you're not the best person, then show me who is, and I will support that.
Challenge accepted.
Amen. All right, well, take care.
Same to you. Thanks again, Trey.
All right, bye.